Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Carl van der Merwe. I'm the Sales Director at EB5 Marketplace. We're here today to discuss some of the sort of, from a high level perspective, some of the investor considerations that investors should consider when looking at an EB5 investment. And we're also going to introduce a new regional center investment. We're pleased to be introducing Western Energy to you, which is a rural project in the oil and gas space. But to discuss with me some of the EB5 investor considerations, I'm very pleased to have Christian Triantafyllis with me. Christian is a partner at Jackson Walker. He's based out of Houston and runs their investment immigration practice. Christian has represented many foreign nationals and immigrant investors in cross-border and business immigration matters. His particular expertise has been in EB5, and he's served as counsel to many regional centers and direct investments and helped developers structure their potential EB5 funding. So great pleasure to have you here, Christian. Thank you very much for taking some time to chat with us.
Thanks, Carl. Happy to be here.
Okay, fantastic. And then we'll hand over to Greg and we'll discuss Western Energy as well. But great to have you here, Greg, as well. Greg is the CEO of Western Energy Regional Center, and I'll let him introduce himself in a few minutes.
Super, thank you.
But yeah, maybe Christian, just to sort of very high level picture here, but the Reform and Integrity Act was signed into law in March, so it's not all that new anymore. But there still seems to be quite a bit of confusion around some of the sort of the major changes to the EB5 law. And there were some significant benefits that were included in the Reform and Integrity Act that investors can now benefit from. And so I wonder if maybe we could just chat about, some of those, and in particular, set aside visas, who benefits from that? What does it mean? Yeah, love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure, absolutely. So I think you said, I agree with what you said in terms of, the Reform and Integrity Act, the RIA, is not all that new anymore, but there's still a lot of questions hanging out there because we need regulations to be released to clear some of the legislation up that was passed in March. But we do have the set-aside visas, and we've started to see those sort of work in real time. And so let's talk about the set-aside visas and what I mean by them being at work now. So when the legislation was passed in March, these set-aside visas were carved out of the 10,000 EB5 visas issued each year to say that 2,000 or 20% of these visas are going to be reserved for rural-based projects, and 10% are reserved for high unemployment area projects, and 2% of the EB5 visas are reserved for infrastructure projects. So rural got the most of these set-aside visas, this 20%. And so of the 10,000, that would mean a 2,000 reserved. Of course, we've had some rollover visas, some extra visas allowed as a result of the unuse of immigrant visas over the last year or two. So we've got more than the 2,000 reserved for rural projects right now, 2,000 visas. So on the visa bulletin, where each month the Department of State and USCIS work together on determining who can move forward with requesting an EB5 visa based on an approved immigrant petition, we can see that the set-aside visas under the rural category is current for all EB5 investors moving forward with the process today. And that goes to show that under the new legislation, the government is saying, look, these set-aside visas have not been used up by any of the investors yet. And so, kind of come one, come all, file your I-526 petitions and move forward with trying to obtain one of these set-aside visas first. And whenever that's oversubscribed and by certain countries, especially that take up more than others, you will start to see a backlog, some retrogression in the future under these set-aside visas, but that's not the case yet. They're still current, as we say on the visa bulletin, very much available for all nationalities around the world. If you look at the visa bulletin, you can see that that's not the case for other targeted employment area categories within the EB-5 visa bulletin. So those who filed before these set-aside visas were established, if you're from China or India, you're currently experiencing a visa backlog because those set-aside visas were not available at the time and weren't available to file under at the time. So you can see the difference on the visa bulletin playing out.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So, I mean, if you as an Indian investor, really, you should really just be considering a visa that, an investment that qualifies for either, one of the two or three set-aside categories. That would that make sense? Does that? Yes,
that would make sense, because right now, one is backlogged under a non-TEA project or non-set-aside set-aside visa project. So that would be investing at $1,050,000. And the rest of the categories that one can file under right now are current, and so that would be what an Indian investor should pursue if they're looking to avoid backlogs for the near future. In the future, though, I do suspect you'll see EB-5 India under the rural category, under the high unemployment area category backlog. But that's where the priority date, the filing date, becomes so important, because those with the earlier filing dates will have first, when their I-526 is approved, I should call it the I-526E, as we see now, is approved under the, when filing with a regional center. The earlier the filing date, the priority date, the more likely you'll be able to move forward with getting the EB-5 visa or green card as compared to the next investor, the later filed investor.
Okay. I mean, maybe, Christian, would love to hear your thoughts on processing timelines as well. I know it's, hard to predict. USCIS is a bit of a black box, but what would you advise? What does normal processing look like nowadays? And
Sure.
Rural qualifies for priority processing. How does that differ from expedited processing?
Well, you asked, what does normal processing look like these days? So within the world of EB-5, that's a bit hard to determine because of the events that have occurred since 2019 to 2020 and into 2021. So we had a lot of activity of filings under the EB-5 category in 2020 and 2019. 2020, then we had COVID slow down all things related to immigration, including the EB-5 program. Adjudicating officers were not able to do their job. They were, working from home at some point, and now hopefully more or less back in the office, back at it, adjudicating petitions. However, during 2021 to 2022, we had the shutdown of the regional center program, which delayed EB-5 petitions further. So I still have cases that are pending from 2019, for example. However, before that, we did see pretty regularly I-526s adjudicated within 12 to 24 months or so. So, you have to think about what it looked like before these disruptions. Now let's think about post-disruption. What's happened? Well, we had the passing of the RIA, in which Congress said, we want to figure out how to make sure all I-526s can be adjudicated within 240 days of filing, and even more so if it's in a TEA, 120 days of filing. And now, do I think that's going to happen overnight? No, I do not. I think, the IPO is also, the EB-5 unit is in the process of staffing back up, getting their house in order to adjudicate these petitions in a more timely fashion. In terms of priority processing, I would love to see that look something like 12 months, at least to start. But priority processing really, in my mind, is anything faster than the normal processing times. And so that could be 12 months. It could be, 20 months. It could be, trying to meet the mandate of Congress and being at 120 to 240 days. But it's hard to say until we actually see a pattern of adjudications, a pattern of approvals. But what we do know is the government is trying to prioritize I-526 e-petitions filed in rural-based projects. And so, if one's main objective is speed, looking to a rural project makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Adjustment of status is a new benefit as well that in the Reform and Integrity Act. I know it's a very meaty topic and there's a lot of nuances around it. So maybe just sort of very high level, comments on this. So, who would qualify? What are the benefits? Are there any risks to doing it? So, or maybe if you wouldn't mind just explaining what it really is.
Adjustment of status has been a meaty topic, and rightfully so. It's a big benefit to a lot of families in the United States who are waiting out their immigrant process. So, what adjustment of status is it's the application that requests the green card, requests to become a permanent resident, based on having filed an immigrant petition or having an approved immigrant petition. So in the past, before the RIA, we couldn't, under the EB-5 category, if someone was residing in the United States under a certain non-immigrant visa status, one could not file to request permanent resident status, to request the green card, until the I-526 petition was approved by USCIS. That was, in many other immigrant categories, it's different. You could always file the adjustment of status before the approval of the immigrant petition. But now with the new legislation, they said USCIS does allow for what's called concurrent filing of the adjustment of status application for those in the United States who are filing, and so they can file the adjustment of status application at the same time as filing the I-526 immigrant petition, or if they already have one on file with USCIS and has not been approved, you can file the adjustment of status application. Now, there are some limitations to that. You have to have a current priority date on the visa bulletin, so that will be an ongoing item to watch for certain nationalities. But what it does do for somebody is it's not going to approve the green card before the immigrant petition. You're not going to become a permanent resident before your I-526 petition is approved. The I-526 petition has to be approved in order for the adjustment of status to be approved to become a permanent resident, or in the case of EB-5, a conditional permanent resident. However, while waiting for that petition and application to be approved, you'll get these interim benefits of receiving a travel permit and a work permit. We call it the advanced parole and the employment authorization document. And so that's a big deal for families that are here on H-1B and have been beholden to their employer for many years, trying to get through any other form of immigrant process. Now, if they concurrently file their adjustment of status application while in the US, they can get their work permit and move on to another job, start their own business. Maybe if they don't have a visa, but they're here in the US on a non-immigrant status, now they have the advanced parole to travel internationally. They can go visit family at home. So it really opens up a lot of opportunities for those with the resources to move forward with EB-5 if you're here in the United States. So adjustment of status is not available if you're outside the United States. You need to be inside the United States And you also need to be careful about moving forward with adjustment of status depending on what kind of non-immigrant visa status you are in the U.S. So things like H-1B visa, L-1 visa, it's a very easy analysis in terms of filing adjustment of status. Those are visas with dual intent. Go right ahead and file your adjustment of status if you're here. Other visa statuses like F1 student, E2, we file adjustment of status applications often, and we make sure to do it when the timing's right, when it makes sense for the family, and on occasion we'll come across a visitor who's here and decides to stay long term and moves forward with their EB-5 case and is able to file an adjustment of status application and wait out their EB-5 green card here. So it's been very helpful to a lot of families, a lot of clients of mine who had I-526s on file prior to the RIA, who have been able to take advantage of adjustment of status application filing, and new clients going forward who have done so as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Christian. So yeah, it sounds like, it's a good, good advice to get advice from an experienced immigration attorney like yourself on this matter if you're unsure.
Yes,
I see we do have a few questions. We can address those at the end, Christian. So if you wouldn't mind sticking around, we'll come to those later. But I think I just want to move on and introduce Western Energy. Greg Nair is the CEO of Western Energy Regional Center, and he'll present the opportunity as well. Greg, great having you here. And before I hand over to you, I just want to quickly read this disclaimer, if you're okay. Well, it popped off there, but yeah, just I'll share the disclaimer at the end.
Okay. Got it. I wasn't aware of the disclaimer. Sorry.
Not at all.
Sorry, my bad. Hi, everyone. Greg Nair speaking from Western Energy. I'm based here in Seattle, Washington, but we run a regional center that invests in the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma in the USA. So we're starting out a new fundraising effort to put together our second EB-5 fund. The first one started about 5 years ago. This one we intend to pull the fund together and start investing in the oil and gas industry in around February of 2023. So between over the next 3 months, pulling together this fund. It's open for subscription today. It is a rural EB-5 investment, so it does qualify for that priority processing and those 20% visas set aside. As I said, it's in the oil and gas industry. I'd like to make a case today that oil and gas is a very good way to invest in EB-5 and participate in EB-5, and I'll have some reasons for you there. Not the least of which is that right now is a very good time to invest in oil and gas. We have quite high and oil and natural gas prices, and because of that, we're able to structure a nice investment for investors that could, and we'll explain that in a minute, all going well, start to pay back the principal portion of the investment slightly faster than perhaps traditional projects after the investors have finished their sustainment period, something we'll discuss here later. And lastly, that the oil industry is a high priority industry for investment for the U.S. government. As you know, we're struggling to become energy independent, and all, the U.S., but all parts of the world want to be less dependent on oil production from outside their own country. And so investing in the oil industry in the U.S. is quite a high priority. And hopefully because of that, I'll talk a little bit about the fact that the USCIS has expedited the processing of our own of our own documentation, and I'll explain a little bit about what the reasons behind that were. So who are we? Well, I've previously worked in the banking industry for Barclays Capital for many years in Asia. I also previously worked for the Boston Consulting Group. More recently, I founded another oil and gas private equity fund, which then sort of morphed into this regional center, which we call Western Energy Regional Center. And as I said, this is the second offering from Western Energy. We partner with oil and gas operators in Oklahoma. Our capital goes alongside the capital of oil and gas operators in Oklahoma. We've put together this second offering with a sturdy group of friends. We have using JTC as our fund administrator. Our economic analysis done by Vermilion, Kim Atterbury, who was formerly the chief economist of USCIS. We have partners. We have our legal partner, our fund documents prepared by Baker Donaldson, Robert Devine, and we partner with oil and gas reserve and technological companies down in Oklahoma City, in particular Pinnacle Energy. Okay, so we've been doing it a while and put together a nice team of people to help us. Let me just quickly build on a little bit of what Carl and Christian had started talking about, which is that this is a rural EB5 investment in the oil and gas industry. You've heard this already. That provides us priority processing, the lower investment amount, the set aside of visa availability, and I also discussed the high importance of the oil industry, both in the context of developing more oil and gas for better energy independence in the US, but also the importance of creating jobs in rural areas, in those rural parts of Oklahoma, where many of the oil field workers will have these jobs created. That's a very high priority for the state and federal governments associated with those parts of the US. So nice backing from and support from our federal and state governments. So a little bit about oil and gas. Well, now that we are focused on, we have the EB5 program focused on rural America rather than the urban projects we had seen previously. The question is, what's a good investment in a rural area? And one such good investment is energy. It's actually the largest industry in rural America, and our oil and gas and associated energy industries are 7% of US GDP, quite a big piece of our economy. As I said, at least now, no promises for the future of oil and gas prices, but right now and for the foreseeable future, the prices are high, and there's a big need for capital, meaning now is a good time to invest in oil and gas. And I'd also let you know that oil and gas does work well for job creation in these rural areas, and in particular, the use of indirect and induced jobs that, whereas we are creating a number of jobs, what we say at the wellhead where we're drilling wells, we're also creating indirect jobs in the downstream part of the oil industry, meaning things like transportation, refinery, but also electricity generation, that sort of thing. So a big industry in the rural parts of America. So how do we work? We work, our investment is structured as what we call a working interest. Working interest means that the EB5 capital will enter into a project alongside the capital of a major oil and gas operator, and that our investment is actually at the JCE level, meaning at the level at which we acquire the assets, is an equity investment. We actually buy and then own our share of the oil wells and the oil that's produced. We partner with an operator who is truly our operational end, who physically drills the wells and sells the oil and natural gas that are produced on a daily basis down to major oil operators who then refine it. This, for those of you who have some knowledge of the oil and gas industry, is not a use of investor capital for exploration, meaning to look for new oil fields. This is actually the use of capital to develop what we call proven reserves. Reserves, to physically build the oil wells on acreage in Oklahoma, where we have a good knowledge of the amount of oil and gas that are under the surface. So we focus heavily on proven reserves. Sometimes this is considered the more boring end of oil and gas, but it's also the part where it has steadier and more steadier returns, investment returns. We're embarking on a 2-year program to drill about 25 odd oil wells. That's what keeps the jobs moving and created over a couple-year timeline with this capital. Okay, I'll go quickly here. I'll just give a very brief overview, but essentially there's 6 things to know. One is that we acquire leases over land that provide the mineral rights to that land, meaning in the mineral rights are the rights to the things underneath the ground. In this case, oil, but it could also be things like metals. We partner to develop oil wells. We create those oil wells. Oil and gas are then pumped out of those wells on a daily basis and sold to major companies to be refined. The price at which that oil is sold on a daily basis is based on the global market for oil and gas, now currently very high. And 5 and 6 are important here. We then use that revenue, the revenue from the daily sales of oil, to that's what we use to pay back our investors. So one difference, I suppose, than what we've seen in the past in terms of EB5 investment is that this is actually an operating business that has daily revenues, and we're using those revenues to pay back our investors. That's slightly different than perhaps the building of a building, for instance, or a set of buildings where they might need to be refinanced or sold down. The building itself is sold to accrue the profits to return to investors. Rather, here we're accruing revenue along the way, each and every day, and building up that revenue in a capital account on behalf of our investors to pay them back. Something that you as an investor could see building up through our fund administrators portal, for instance. Importantly here, myself and my partners as the developers, as the project sponsors here, are in line behind our investors to get paid the profits from the oil development. Meaning, we're going to build up the investors' profits first, pay them, and then the deal is, after those investors are paid back their principal plus interest, only then do I start to receive the profits, the excess profits from the project. That will be a few years out, but that's how I get, so that's how we get paid in the project, which incents us to pay our investors back quickly so that we can start to get paid. On the topic of repayment, I think we've heard that one change in the RIA is that investors' capital must be at risk for no less than 2 years, And in fact, all 800,000 of their investment must be invested during that sustainment period. But after those things are achieved, meaning all of the 800K has been put into the project, and the investor's capital has been at risk for that 2-year period, the project can start paying back the principal to the investors. And in this case, what we've put in our documents is that we will mandatorily sweep up the excess cash in the JCE and put it into the capital account on behalf of investors. With that goal in mind, and with the advantages we have right now, at least in the oil industry, with very high prices and very positive returns, at least how it's modeled today, we could start to pay back investors almost, after that 2 years, that 2-year sustainment period. And based on today's modeling, things can change, but we could potentially, as it's modeled now, see investors fully repaid in probably 3 years. Again, can't make that promise. Your capital must be at risk. Also, noting that things can change in the oil industry, and we have the risks associated with that, but that's currently modeled. Okay, one last little thing, which is we talked briefly. Carl touched on expedite, and what we mean here is what's happened here. Well, we as Western Energy Regional Center applied to the USCIS for them to process our documentation, meaning for the application for us to be redesignated as a regional center, and they approved that expedite. And the case that we had made for that expedited request was the one I made to earlier in this conversation, which is that the oil industry and investment in the oil industry is in the national interest for the U.S. And so they did expedite our documentation in an expedited manner. They granted that. Of course, they say they review expedite requests on a case-by-case basis. And in this case, they did approve it for us. And so again, making sure it's clear, no promises, but what we would propose to do on behalf of our investors is to submit the same or similar expedite requests with each of our investors' I-526E, if that's what they so choose. So for each of the I-526E applications made by an investor, we will support that with an expedite request letter, and that expedite request letter will be the same letter that we used for to request the expedite of our own documentation. So that's an exciting little piece for us. I'll pause there, Carl, both for questions and for disclaimers. But that's the end of my piece.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we do have a couple questions here, and feel free to type anything in, any questions, and if anyone still has some more questions, and maybe I'll just hand them over to you. I don't know if you want to take your screen off screen sharing for now, Greg.
Yeah, I do.
So a question, what is the break even for you, Greg? What is the break even oil price for positive returns? Is that you've done some sensitivity on that? And
yes, and I'm stopping sharing now. Yes, good question. Where we've been active in Oklahoma, the break-even price is in the high 20s of dollars per barrel. So even conservatively around $30 per barrel. is the break even, and below that, they may still continue pumping because much of the costs are capital expenditures rather than operating, but that's around the break even, the high 20s of dollars per barrel.
Okay.
Around 28 to 30.
Thanks, Greg. Christian, a question for you from someone here. What's the processing time for concurrent adjustment of status? Do you have any sort of recent evidence on how long that takes?
Yeah, it's still been kind of a little unpredictable. I would still predict, though, around 1 to 2 years for that I-485 application to be approved. But again, the interim benefits of the I-765 application and the I-131 application, which are the work permit and the travel permit, you're going to get those while waiting out the process. So we're now seeing the work permits issued in well under 6 months, in some cases as quickly as 3 to 4 months. The travel permit is still taking longer than that, but USCIS did separate out the two to prioritize getting people proper work authorization to be able to support themselves here in the United States. So it's still, probably more than a year process to get the 485 application approved. But in the meantime, we are seeing faster benefits issued.
Thanks, Christian. And I apologize if I've got some background noise here. But Greg, a question for you as well that has come up in the past as well. What if you don't have the required number of investors? How does that affect the project and job creation?
Good question. So this is our second fund, so people know. Our first fund was quite small, 6 investors, and for $3 million. And we invested that capital alongside into a set of projects at a very low percentage of working interest, meaning percentage ownership. And the interesting thing was that made the job creation quite high because the EB5 portion of the project were small. So there's 3 possible steps as an answer to this question. Number one, luckily in the oil industry, we can make a project slightly smaller or bigger, meaning we can decide not to do, say, 5 of the wells, and that could be moved out of the project. So one potential solution is to do a slightly smaller project. Unlike building a hotel, I think you can't only build 70% of a hotel. Here you can parse out some of the wells. More likely is that it would require our operator partners to put in more of the capital than what we would do if we were fully subscribed, and that's fine. The operator have very deep pockets. They like to partner with us because our capital is equity capital. It enables them to do more projects, and they can make more money from those projects and do more. But they don't. In this case, they can put in a little bit more, and so that's a second solution. And in that case, we would take a smaller percentage working interest than we would if we were fully subscribed. So those are the 2 main things, which is the ability to do a slightly smaller project, but also the ability to take a lower percentage interest in the same large project. Thanks,
Greg. Quite a few questions here. I'll try and get through them quickly, but could you touch on collateral? Is there any collateral for EB5 investors? Yes. The project company, which was also called the JCE, Western Energy Development 2 in this case, they actually own the oil wells that are drilled in the percentage, again, of the working interest, and they own the oil and gas that's produced. And so in the case of a default, or now talking just about the worst case scenario, which is that the very worst case scenario is that the company fails, the investors
all of the assets of that company, meaning the oil wells themselves, the lease holdings, and all the equipment on there, are pledged to the investors. The owners of that pledge that down to the investors, and that's the collateral, and that's what investors can count on in a default or a worst case scenario. Unmute, Carl.
Maybe a follow on from the earlier question, but do you have a sense of what percentage of capital could be returned within, say, 2 or 3 years? Is there any?
No, I'm going to give the giant disclaimer is that this is projections only, not promises, and the capital is at risk. We as currently modeled, we will within those 2+ years of the sustainment period, a lot of the revenues of the project will have accrued, and so as currently modeled, it looks like we will pay back investors at around the 3rd year of their investment. Just so people know, in the oil industry, the first few months or first month that an oil well is online is its most productive. It has higher pressure at the beginning, and so you get more oil produced at the beginning, and then using my hand to show, there's a decline, a long decline after that. And so to have the early parts of the project happen during a high price environment is very positive for the project and will set us off on a good path, and with the goal of getting investors their payback in that 3-year period, noting that obviously their investment is at risk, and those are projections only.
Christian, question for you. Has USCIS confirmed that it'll accept the sustainment period to be 2 years from investment, as opposed to the end of the 2-year conditional residency period?
I wouldn't say that USCIS has confirmed that. They're not. They have not stated that publicly at this point. There is a stakeholders call coming up in October, and perhaps some of those items will be clarified during that time. But for now, as Greg had mentioned, we're relying on the law that was passed. We ought to look at what does it mean to be invested. Are we talking about wiring over to the escrow account, the NCE, or actually the JCE receiving the EB5 funds and spending the money? So there are some questions around that. But the way it is written sure does look like that USCIS could be stating that the sustainment period is going to be a 2-year hold, and from there you're eligible to get your capital back. But no, USCIS has not confirmed it. They're not really an agency where you're going to email them and ask questions to confirm. But we do have some upcoming stakeholder engagement opportunities, and again, the regulations should also help clarify. So whenever you're moving forward with a project, the ability could be there to receive money back after 2 years and not spoil your immigration process, but it'll be dependent on making sure that USCIS doesn't state otherwise between now and then. Of course, if like Greg has mentioned, if the funds are there, but they can't pay you back yet, well, at least the funds are available for whenever you will be eligible to be paid back upon completing your sustainment period.
Excellent, thanks. I don't think we'll get through all the questions, but 1 or 2 more if you have, let's try and answer them. Is it possible for all rural visas for a given year to be taken by one nationality, or does every country have a right to some of the rural visas?
Every country has the right to some of the rural visas. Is still based on a capping of 7% of once the overall rural visas are taken up, the government will cap those countries that are taking up all of the rural visas at 7%. So you'll start to see a backlog for those individuals that are born in those countries that are taking up the maximum or the most of the rural visas, to make sure that other nationalities can still take advantage of it as well.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, I think we've sort of touched on most of the questions here. Some are I think have somewhat been addressed, but I think, yeah, just in the interest of keeping this to sort of 45 minutes, I'm going to suggest that if anyone has any questions, they email us, myself or Greg or Christian, and we'll certainly get back to you. I wanted to thank both of you for your time, and also just to point out to potential investors that we do we've done a lot of due diligence on this investment as well. It's all available on our website, EB5 Marketplace. So if you log into the website, you just have to input your contact details, and you'll have access to the due diligence. So that's certainly something you should look to if you have any further questions as well. So thanks, gentlemen, and we'll appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining.
All right, thanks, Carl. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you very much, Carl and Christian. That was great. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.